All right. This episode is brought to you by Mubi. What's up, everybody? Welcome to Show Me the Meaning, Wisecrack's movie podcast.
Show me the meaning!
I'm Jared, and with me is the Show Me the Meaning crew. We got Ryan.
Hey, film fans, what's up?
And Austin.
What up? I'm here for some wanky nonsense.
And joining us for the first time in a while, fresh off the Westworld podcast, is Claire.
Hello.
Welcome back, Claire.
Thanks. I'm so excited to be back. I love Gone Girl so much.
Yeah, how's your summer going? I've been noticing you've been doing a lot of stuff with bunnies and rock climbing.
Yes. I was bunny sitting. The bunny has gone back to his original owner, but he was real cute. Oh, cutest bunny. That pretty much sums up. Sorry, that pretty much sums up my summer. Bunnies, rock climbing, grading papers, something about a dissertation or who knows.
Yeah, we can skip that part.
Yeah. How are you all doing?
We're doing good. Just trying to survive the LA heat, waiting for it to go away.
It's too hot, Claire.
Yeah, it's too hot. Anyway.
So
today we're breaking down the 2014 film Gone Girl, directed by David Fincher, written by Gillian Flynn, starring Ben Affleck and Rosamund Pike. As always, let's go ahead and get some first impressions. Let's start with Ryan.
This is top shelf Fincher, I think. I love it. I loved it when it came out. I think, and it's one of those movies that really does there's a little bit of a mystery box element to it that you pick up on new stuff the more you watch it. I mean, I liked it way more the second time I saw it than the first time I saw it, and then it's just gotten better. So I love this movie. I'm glad.
How many times have you seen it now?
I want to say about half a dozen, 6 or so.
Yeah. Cool. Let's go with the guest, Claire.
So I am a Gone Girl book diehard fan. So the first time, you already know, you can predict about 3/4 of the upcoming podcast based on what I just said. But the first time I saw the movie, my first reaction was, oh, this isn't like the book at all. And I was kind of disappointed, which is why I basically begged you to let me be on the podcast, because I've been thinking about it since it came out. I see clips every once in a while, and I've read the book again several times, and it's kind of been slowly building up to the realization that everyone else had back when it came out, that hey, this is not supposed to be the same thing as the book. This is a very different it's a different kind of thing. So the last time I was on this podcast, we were doing Eyes Wide Shut, and in a lot of ways, the second time I did the full watch through, which was in the last few days for this podcast, honestly, in some ways it resembles like Eyes Wide Shut or another Fincher film more than it resembles the book. And I'm really okay with that. And I like the movie for what it is now, which I didn't the first time I saw it. So now I'm excited about the movie as the movie and not just the movie as what wasn't the book.
And notably, it's the screenplay was written by the author of the book, which is
and that's amazing.
Unheard of, kind of.
It's
and
unheard of. The only
movie.
other time I can think of that is Anne Rice wrote the adaptation for Interview with a Vampire. But anytime an author is able to distance themselves from their own work enough to create something for a different medium and it turn out good is super impressive.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right.
I mean,
Austin,
playwrights do it all. Playwrights do it all the time.
Oh, yeah, the guy who wrote...
Neil LaBute. Neil LaBute does it all the time.
Martin McDonough.
Who's the guy who wrote Doubt?
Oh, I don't remember that.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
That
Flannery?
guy. Something Irish.
Yeah.
All right, Austin, what do you think about this movie?
Tracy Letts, too, is another one. Anyway, keep going.
Meh?
You don't like
You're
it?
fucking kidding me.
Is this your first time? Is this your first time?
It's all right. It's middle tier Fincher for me, if I'm going to use Ryan's verbiage.
Middle tier Fincher, huh?
Yeah.
Really?
It's in there with Social Network.
That's top tier. That's top tier Fincher.
I mean, Fincher just might be ridiculously tiered, but what is top tier for you?
Fight Club.
That's it?
That's fair. I mean...
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say because anything that Fincher does is good, right? So it's like I even just recently watched Death Proof, which I think is not a good movie.
Wait.
That's
Tarantino, bro.
It's not a good movie, but it's not a good Tarantino movie. It's just like not a good movie. I don't know. It's hard because the scale gets so out of whack. Because I think obviously Fincher is more than a competent technician, and then he's a very intriguing filmmaker, and he's a masterful craftsman, and he's a perfectionist. So there are all those things that I think you can see in the thing that's created. But two things. The first time I saw it, the twist was really fun. It was really surprising. Now, when you know the twist, that takes a lot out of it, right? So for me, I think that's something that's detrimental on a repeated viewing. For me it was. And then I think that Rosamund Pike's performance for me actually was overpraised so much. I thought that there was this intention to be extremely sleek and cool and sexy that just didn't work very well for me on the second viewing. I actually really liked it the first viewing. Second viewing, I'm kind of like, meh.
Did you, Austin, you intentionally use the word cool? Are you, and I think maybe we can talk about this later with the cool girl speech, the pretty infamous cool girl speech, but that seems like a pretty critical part of it to me. But,
yeah, Austin.
Yeah, I have a lot of things to say, including I will fight you about Death Proof.
Oh, really? That's not what I was expecting her to say.
I hate that. I hate that
dude,
movie.
I'm excited. This is going to be like Austin's Cabin in the Woods because I hated Cabin in the Woods, and I fucking love this movie. This is maybe even top Fincher to me. I think this is the most relevant movie ever. I watched this movie 10 out of 10. Ran home, ran to Amazon, ordered the book. Read the book, loved the book, 10 out of 10. Ran to my DVD collection, watched the movie again, 10 out of 10. And I've loved the fuck out of this movie every single time. I mean, I don't know. I tend to focus a lot on, the way that narrative affects our lives. As somebody who, at Wisecrack, we study narrative, so the way that narrative has kind of informed the way that we interact with each other and the way that we can construct our own identities and interpret other people's identities is something that I think is so important that people talk about, and I think is so interesting. And of course, the way that the media affects us and even constructs reality.
Perception is everything.
Perception is everything. We talked about that on the Incredibles 2 podcast, so you know that this is the stuff that gets my heart beating. So it's only reasonable that I would love the shit out of this movie. Plus, I think that this is kind of one of the coolest Ben Affleck performances, because it's not often that you see Ben Affleck playing like the guy who is initially the super good-looking jock guy, but under the facade, he's just kind of a lazy schlub.
This is honestly one of my favorite Ben Affleck performances, mostly because of how un-Ben Affleck-y he is.
Yeah.
Like he reminds me of the Ben Affleck you read about in tabloids, which is perfect.
Yes,
which is perfect.
Exactly.
But not the Ben Affleck who's like Batman.
Right. He seems like a guy who has got a lot going for him, but is just kind of an alcoholic who's depressed all the time. Maybe I just got too real with Ben Affleck. But anyway, before we go on,
you didn't deserve Jennifer Garner.
All right, before we go on to the summary, I want to give a shout out to some of the very, very kind, awesome people who left us a review on iTunes. So once again, if you guys have the time, it really helps us to grow and really helps us keep things going here if you just spend a couple minutes giving us a review. So this one's from Izzy194. He says, they have all kinds of intellectual discussions about media that I wish I was still having. Since graduating college, I miss hearing these kind of ideas on a weekly basis, and this podcast remedies that. Well, thank you, Izzy. This next one is from Tenacious Dustin. Like all of Wisecrack's online content, this podcast does an amazing job looking at current and classic films, their themes, philosophy, and meaning. Thank you so much, Tenacious Dustin. And this one is called Nicknames Aren't Relevant. He said, this is a great podcast. If you're looking for more of your favorite films, it'll also expose you to films you may not have known otherwise. So thank you guys so much for leaving us reviews. And if you guys haven't done it yet, I highly recommend it. All right, so let's go on with the recap. So Nick Dunn is lamenting his 5-year anniversary when he learns that his wife Amy has gone missing. The police peg him as their prime suspect, but Nick suspects something is weird when he finds a series of clues his wife left behind before her, quote, disappearance. Intercut with this, we experience the story of Amy and Nick's meeting and marriage through the point of Amy's diary. What started as a fairy tale romance descended into shit when they both lose their jobs and move back to Nick's hometown in bumfuck Missouri, where Nick's frustration eventually leads him to hitting her and her feeling afraid for her life. Nick follows all her clues when it's revealed that Amy is not dead. She faked her death and meticulously planted evidence to point to Nick as the killer in order to exact revenge for cheating on her, taking her money, and discarding her. Amy gets mugged and has to take refuge with a rich ex-boyfriend, Desi Collins. Meanwhile, Nick lawyers up and wins over the media's favor. After seeing Nick kill it on TV, Amy frames Desi as her captor and kills him. Amy returns to Nick, impregnates herself, and blackmails him into starting a family with her. End of movie. All right, guys, before we move into our first discussion point, I want to give a shout out to our sponsors over at Mubi. So I've talked about Mubi before. They are the best. So Mubi is a digital cinema. It is basically, there are always 30 movies on the site to watch. You have 30 days to watch a movie, and then after that, it's gone. And these aren't just any movies. These are specifically curated movies. They're either acclaimed masterpieces, cult classics, or festival fresh darlings. The thing I like about Mubi is they're always suggesting films that either I haven't visited in a long time. There are new films by foreign filmmakers that I weren't even aware were still making films. They're always making sure that my viewing habits aren't too dull. And if you guys, normally you can get a free trial of Mubi for 7 days, but if you head to mubi.com/wisecrack, you can get an extended 30-day free trial. So that's 30 potential movies to watch. So one thing that they've got going on I want to draw your guys' attention to is they're doing a retrospective of the works of Francois Ozon. I hope I'm getting that right. But Ryan, have you seen the movie Swimming Pool?
No.
Have you heard of it?
Yeah.
Okay. Austin, have you seen any of Ozon movies?
Yeah, trying to remember. After Swimming Pool, he did one.
Was it the other one with Charlotte Rampling?
Yes. What's that one called?
I can't remember. Swimming Pool is the only one I've actually seen, and Mubi's got a selection of all the other ones that I'm actually really excited to watch. But they're all kind of these steamy, erotic mystery thrillers that are not only really titillating, but just really provocative and really interesting. I've seen Swimming Pool probably 2 or 3 times, and I think that's kind of the one that really made it popular in the States. So I really recommend checking out Mubi to check out his work. It's definitely unique and definitely is going to stimulate you in a number of ways.
Huh.
All right, guys. So back to the show. All right. So right up top, I think let's talk about narrative. Let's talk about what this movie does, not only with media, but also identity.
David Fincher says, that if you split it up into 3, it's like a perfect mystery movie for the first act. Then moves into a real thriller for the second act. And the third act it becomes a satire. What do you think about that?
Satire? What? Yeah. Why a satire?
Well, that's David Fincher's words. You'd have to ask him. But I mean...
Well, but you seem to agree, so I'm wondering...
Well, yeah, I mean, at the end, it's about, kind of like Jared was saying, it's relevant about perception is everything, about how the media, the current media landscape, it's about our times now, how all that matters is what you see in the tabloids, and people create their own narratives, what they want from there. So.
Yeah, I think a good way to start this conversation is Austin and I have thrown around this term that I don't even know if it's a real term that I'm still trying to figure out. We've talked about this idea of post-cynical. And one thing that I'm seeing in the news, so in the news people say it's oh, such and such happened, that therefore we're taking control of the narrative. And what people mean by that is that let's say an event happened, but it seems that the news media or people in general, when they say that, oh, we're taking control of the narrative, they're not really concerned about reality. They're just concerned about the level of reality that we all operate on, which is this kind of media-saturated hyper-reality. And to me, this is so cynical, that we really are at a place in society where we don't even try to get at the truth anymore. It's just that, okay, can we manipulate truth or package truth in a way to where we can advance our own agendas? It's not even that the idea of manipulating the narrative or pushing certain narratives. It's not even something that people in smoky rooms, manipulate. It's just out in the open now. We're all just okay with the fact that reality is gone. There are only these prepackaged narratives that we essentially just brainwash people into thinking.
Well, I think that we're aware of the real reality and that we're all lying to ourselves basically, but it's almost like a game at this point. It's like, all right, there are sides and you are on one side, and that the public at large, like we all we all buy into the narrative, but we also all accept that it's not how it should be, I feel like, or at least a lot of people do. Maybe.
All
what
right.
do you think, Austin? What's your take?
This is for Irish Ray on Twitter, who complained about my utter wanky nonsense. I'm about to get utter wanky and nonsensical here.
Let's get wanky, baby.
Should we get wanky before I just spell out basically what we're talking about in the context of the movie before you get too wankified?
Okay. Yeah.
So I've got it written down. So basically. Okay. This movie, so let's talk about how it is in the media. So in this way, the story is in a lot of ways about control. And the most pivotal type of control that you can have is control over the narrative. So the film basically shows how a well-constructed narrative can prevail over reality in a way that things seem are more important than how they are. People are unwilling or unable to discern the truth in favor of a palatable narrative. So this is done a couple ways in the film. So one, the characters are reduced to consumable narratives. So there's a really memorable part in the movie. Actually, there are a whole bunch of just one-liners in the movie where people are saying things like, oh, why is she dressed like a babysitter? Or there's the part where a neighbor says, she's talking about Amy, seems like a rich bitch to me, spoiled rich girl, married a cheating asshole. This idea of the spoiled rich girl that married a cheating asshole, that is a narrative that, because we've all watched television, we've all seen the news, this is so ingrained in us that when we see a person that we don't even know, but they seem to fit some elements of that familiar narrative, we will just pigeonhole that into it because it becomes more consumable and palatable for us to do so. And this is essentially the entire conflict of the movie, is that Amy is able to manipulate public perception by creating and curating this reality that makes it seem like that Nick is falling into the narrative traps of being an abusive husband, of being someone who resents her, of being someone who wants to take her money and wants to basically just cheat on her and abscond with his 20-year-old girlfriend after taking all of her money, and that he's a murderer, all these things. And so basically the movie is saying, and it's all over this movie. This movie is so subtle in all of its executions of this. And I can talk for the rest of the movie, but that's basically what we mean. It's not only in the conflict of Amy constructing this narrative that ultimately almost puts Nick in jail, but also that her life is mostly been constructed not only by her parents, who are always comparing her to the amazing Amy character, but also that her identity is always being kind of crushed by men in her life, whether it's Desi, who once she takes refuge in his house, he wants to construct her in his image. He wants her to start working out again because she had gained a little bit of weight when she decided she was going to kill herself. And so he's like, no, you got to go back to being your real self, which is the super hot skinny girl. So I'll let Austin start wanking. Go ahead, Ro.
Well, so there's a philosopher named Byung-Chul Han, who I've been really interested in, I'd say, for the past couple of months. And one of the things he talks about is that in this stage of late capitalism or postmodernism or neoliberal capitalism, whatever you want to call the epoch that we are currently in right now, he says that everything becomes a consumable image. And it's a consumable image based on some sort of projected fantasy that derives from ourselves, which means that nothing is really ever other, nothing is really ever traumatic. There's no what he calls negativity. And what he means by that is basically just something that would challenge us or transform us. Everything just becomes a consumable image for our own pleasure seeking, that we are these, he calls us achievement subjects. We're constantly trying to improve on ourselves or make ourselves better. And this leads to what he calls the burnout society in one of his books. But the idea is that everything is this consumable commodity, and it doesn't just mean like the food that you actually eat, but even the media images that we consume, let's say, in our intellectual or like our epistemic encounter in order to derive some sort of satisfaction. And even if it's like we hate watch Love Island because we want to make ourselves feel better, or 16 and Pregnant, or whatever it is, there's still in our hate watching or in our Twitter fighting or in our social media arguments that we have with the random evangelical person that's a creationist, all of that is still an element of this pleasure seeking within what he calls this hyperactive era of positivity. And I think that's something that we see on display in this film, is that all of these consumable images, they exist because of what Marx would call real subsumption. And real subsumption is the phase of capitalist development where capital no longer is something that's existing outside trying to accumulate things, but it literally becomes the embedded logic of everything, because everything is a commodity. Everything is something that is there for your viewing pleasure or for your consumable pleasure. And I think that's one of the things that is quite fascinating about what this film is exploring with regards to the media, which is all a profit-driven thing, right? So it's going to sensationalize, and all these people are camping out in front of the house because they want to attract more eyeballs so that they can charge higher rates for their advertisers. So all of that, I think, is something that Fincher's exploring and playing with, and I think in that sense it's very fascinating.
Absolutely. So it sounds like we're on the same page.
That doesn't mean I like the movie. I just think it's fucking fascinating. I mean, you know, I can make the distinction.
No, of course. Of course. I mean, I guess whereas you are probably very well versed in these ideas before watching the movie, for me, I kind of movies are kind of my introduction into philosophy, and then I find the thinkers later. Then I find the thinkers later. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So when I watched this movie, this was like somebody almost putting into words what I had been thinking my whole life about how, you know, reality is just not even important anymore, and that you're right, that reality will be formed to what is most sellable.
Yeah. I mean, there's something so brilliant about what film is. I think, and here's the thing too, for people listening that are interested in philosophy and some of the stuff that we constantly talk about, film is a way of thinking that is independent from philosophy. We can do like philosophy of film, but there's this brilliant philosopher named John Malarkey who wrote a book on film. He's a film theorist in London, and it's called Refractions of Reality. And one of the things he talks about is that film isn't something that's reducible to something that we can just simply philosophize about. Sure, we can, but film itself is a type of thinking that articulates something independent that philosophy can't articulate. And thinking from film or with film, which is kind of, I think, what you're talking about, Jared, is something that is a unique and valuable sort of endeavor in itself.
Sure. All right, I don't want to... So, Claire, what do you think?
So there's been so many things that have been touched on that I have thoughts about all of them. So I want to maybe roll back a second to the post-cynicism that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And I think that really kind of struck my ear as you said it, because for me, one of the things that makes Gone Girl, both as a book and as a movie, so poignant is its place in the genre of domestic noir. And for those of you who aren't familiar, domestic noir has been around for a long time, but it is having a really recent resurgence. And it's noir films that focus on the home and marriages and the family as sources of deep conflict, and all of the kind of sexuality and cynicism and mistrust and things that you see in traditional noir, those taken and put into a domestic setting where they're so aptly used by so many excellent writers and filmmakers.
Like Double Indemnity would probably be a classic one, right?
I think so, yeah. Rebecca,
another great one.
Alfred Hitchcock, and someone on the writers' chat mentioned that one. I hadn't even remembered that. Some of the more recent books you might have heard of are Paula Hawkins' Girl on a Train, A.S.A. Harrison's The Silent Wife.
The with a dragon tattoo.
Well, she's more settings than that, and she's not married or anything.
Okay.
I'm not sure
There's
that one's
families
domestic noir
involved.
as much,
Yeah, okay,
but it pulls on a lot of similar themes. But one of the things with classic noir that definitely extends to domestic noir is cynicism, and that approach to the environment, to relationships, is what gives it part of that punch. And so, I mean, half of you went to film school, you know so much more about the genre of noir than I do, but it seems like that fits in really closely with any discussion we'd have about cynicism within Gone Girl.
So when you kind of read this as a development of that, do you see it as the cynicism directed toward just relationships in general? And speak to the movie specifically if you can, because I know that in terms of relationships, there's a little bit different in the book, but or is it mostly in how the media has affected the domestic situation, or is it... I guess I'm wondering, are there two separate ideas here? Is it how the media affects narrative and just how we as a society have somehow evolved into consuming narrative in a certain way independent of media?
So I actually think that the media relations in the movie are one of the least interesting things about it.
Man. Are we just too basic?
No, not at all. It seems like they're the things that give it weight and believability. Like the character who's basically Nancy Grace. What's her name? She's played by Minnie Driver.
Sure. Yeah.
She's but I mean, she says almost word for word what Nancy Grace would say in a situation like that. And of course, all of the controlling the narrative, and the way that Nick has to get, his lawyer to throw gummy bears at him to get him to say the right thing so he's likable on screen. All of that's really important to kind of drive home how relevant and this is in this particular place and time. But I think that the cynicism, the relationships, that is more about these characters who are stories in themselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that it's not the media's approach to Amy or to Nick or to Margot that's so interesting to me. It's our relationship to them. They're not people, they're stories.
Right.
And we have very particular expectations for those kinds of stories that are, rolled up into these characters. And when those stories don't pan out the way that we expect them to, it unsettles us. And it's that unsettling that is what makes Gone Girl one of my favorite books and now movies. But I think that the characters as stories, as narratives, rather than as people, is something that's really independently interesting, regardless of the media aspect, which honestly is something that I hadn't spent too much time thinking about the way that the media related, because it just seemed like it was such a given that would be part of how the story unfolded.
Oh, so you're telling me I'm basic. I see. No, I'm kidding.
No,
it's cool. But no, I totally hear what you're saying. So I think, yeah, you're right. Even if we take the media element out of the movie entirely, there's still that, even Nick, in order to woo Amy, has to act in a way. He's putting on a performance. The way that Nick has to act is... everyone is basically just a series of labels and narratives that we have to fit into because we want to project a certain image onto somebody, and we're aware that people think in narratives. So, Nick wants Amy to think of him as, the salt of the earth, pull yourself up by your bootstraps guy who is a perfect foil to her, East Coast elitism or whatever.
And he says that to her on TV, which is interesting. Yeah, it's nice that they're, and nice is a funny word. It's great, I think, that they're so explicit about the narratives that they're selling. So, he goes on TV and, part of it is him controlling the narrative, right? But he goes on TV and he says, I was basically a con man. I tried to sell Amy this picture of what I was. And then, of course, in both the book and the movie, the cool girl speech is maybe one of the most famous, monologues to come out of it. It's much shorter in the movie, but if you don't mind, could I just read the movie version so that
Please.
People know what we're referring to? Okay, so... this is when Amy, we first find out that she is alive. She says, it feels so much better to be dead. And she's driving down the highway talking about Nick. So this is Amy. He loved a girl who didn't exist, a girl I was pretending to be, the cool girl. Men always use that as the defining compliment, right? She's a cool girl. Being a cool girl means I'm hot, brilliant, a funny woman who adores football, poker, and dirty jokes, who plays video games and chugs beer, loves threesome and anal sex, and jams chili dogs into my mouth like I'm hosting the world's biggest culinary gangbang, while remaining a size 2, because cool girls are, above all, hot. Hot and understanding. Cool girls never get angry at their men. They only smile in chagrined, loving manner. So go ahead, shit on me. I don't mind. I'm the cool girl. I wait patiently, years, for the pendulum to swing the other way, for men to start reading Jane Austen, organize scrapbook parties, and make out with each other while we leer, and then we'd say, yeah, he's a cool guy. Instead, women across the nation colluded in our degradation. Pretty soon, every girl was cool girl, and if you weren't, then there was something wrong with you. But it's tempting to be cool girl. For someone like me, who likes to win, it's tempting to be the girl every guy wants. When I met Nick, I knew that's what he wanted. For him, I was willing to try. I couldn't have been cool. Okay, this is way longer than I thought it was, even in the movie.
This is from the book. There's no way this is from the movie.
No, the book one is so much longer. This is from the movie.
When does she say, and present my mouth for fucking? I remember that part.
So I have them pulled up next to each other.
Okay.
Yeah, the
one I have written down is, did you look it up online? Or did you look at an online script?
I have it on Rap Genius, actually.
Okay.
Or now
yeah,
Genius.
I think it's way shorter than that in the movie.
Yeah, this must be from the original script. Because you're
probably.
Right. It doesn't say the line, present my mouth for fucking.
Yeah, she says she only smiles in a chagrin-loving manner and then presents her mouth for fuck. I have it written down. And then it ends right there.
Okay.
Sorry to cut.
It
was way longer than I thought.
Version. Yeah. Yeah, and I wasn't even done, but I'm done now. I'm gonna stop. But apparently that's what it was maybe in the original script. That is not the book version.
So Claire, where do you think is the point at which our expectations are subverted?
Our expectations are subverted in terms of the way that the stories are supposed to play out.
Yeah. You were talking about the sort of cynicism that kind of gets disrupted.
The biggest thing is that as I was watching the movie, even having already read the book, even knowing how everything's going to end, watching the movie, you see these stories of the, man caught in the wicked woman's web, the woman who is, a victim of domestic abuse or the victim of being held hostage and kidnapped, the parents who have lost a child in front of the media. You see all of these different, very familiar stories unfolding, and I just had this gut feeling someone is supposed to die in the end. That's how this ends. Someone dies, and no one dies. And it is part of the, punch comes from the fact that they have to live. They're forced to live now. And these stories are, almost mythic. They're always supposed to end with someone dead. When it gets that big, not everyone comes out of this alive. And it's certainly true that no one comes out of this unscathed. But the fact that, I guess not no one ends up dead, but the person who ends up dead is a relatively minor character. And all of the gore in that scene, this is Desi, the man who is maybe holding her captive, still not really clear on that. He definitely strongly implied that he was not okay with her leaving, but it wasn't...
she doesn't have any other choice.
Yeah.
What is she going to do?
You always have a choice.
Oh, right. Yeah.
No, but his whole the cameras can see people coming in or going out. I'm not gonna lose you again. That sort of thing.
It's kind of meant to be a protective thing, but it's fucking insidious, right?
Well, he says I'm not gonna force myself on you, but he's basically like, am I making myself clear?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of layers of meaning in the things that he is articulating.
And the gore that happens when he dies is so over the top and bloody, but we don't get any gore or blood anywhere else in the movie, because it's also, it's, you know, it's all sanitized, it's all bleached, it's, you know, only seen under a layer of luminol. So when we finally do see blood in her cutting his throat with a box cutter, it's so over the top. And then we have this image of her drenched in blood, which, you know, I will ignore the fact that they somehow don't clean her off at the hospital, but because we then get this glorious image of her in, you know, like, oh, this is actually before the hospital, but we get this image of her in this nightgown, drenched in blood, falling and fainting into Nick's arms. And I forgot my original point. I'm just so lost in the imagery of it now.
Yeah, it's ready for the cameras for sure.
Did I have a point in there somewhere that someone
I don't know.
remembers?
I liked the meandering. Well, it was about, I asked about subverting our expectations.
Yeah, what did you mean by that? It feels like you were baiting us for something.
No. It was just, she had mentioned that with regards to this genre of domestic noir, how it a lot of times subverts our expectations. And one of the things that I think was so interesting with what Claire was talking about, to kind of as a supplement to what Jared's initial point was about media images, is that the media images are just an extension of this same sort of logic that I was talking about earlier with regards to real subsumption, or to what Byung-Chul Han calls the radical positivity of life, that everything kind of exists as a consumable product, that even the cool girl image that she plays and the pull your bootstraps up, or pull yourself up by your bootstraps image that he plays, that those are all just commodified, consumable images for the other person to make each other, I don't know, have jolts of dopamine rushes so you can feel better. I mean, that's why their anniversary game, it's all about like sex, and she does all of this stuff to make him feel like he's a man or whatever it is that she's doing, right? And they're both playing this kind of free floating game where there is no depth of reality to any sort of identity, or there's no connection to something transcendent, or there's nothing that exists beyond. It's all just this level of superficial, transparent, commodified images. And that's exactly what Byung-Chul Han says is problematic about society today, is that there is no connection to anything more than the roles that we play, or the images that we're fed, or the products that we consume. And this film definitely plays that. The question that I have for Claire is, do you think this film suggests, because of its confounding our expectations, does it get us to something a little bit beyond that by disrupting our expectations of the images that we consume?
What do you mean by getting us to something beyond that?
Well, so for Han, it's that we encounter what he calls the negativity. And that is the break within the just homogeneous plane of the same. If everything is just a consumable image, if everything is just something that we commodify to make ourselves feel better, and that's what we see in the game that they play with each other. This film,
you think
go ahead.
That's something to make themselves feel better?
Well, I mean, I'm interested in psychoanalysis, so I'd say that everything is ultimately about some sort of libidinal drive for the pleasure-seeking aspect. Even when you do something that's quote unquote painful, it's got some sort of measure of pleasure.
I mean, no, I would agree, but you phrased it in a way that implies that they were actually, I think you actually said that they were doing it for each other, that she set up this game to make him feel more masculine. Whereas to me, I mean, he hates this game, and she knows that he hates this game and has for years, and just makes it more and more cruel every time. And he says in the movie,
what game are we talking about?
Oh, the anniversary game.
Clues.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, with the clues. And he says, even before year 5's game starts, that every year it's about reminding him how he's not good enough. So, I mean, you know, I would accept the psychoanalytic interpretation that there's something like some kind of libidinal cathexis for her, but I don't think she's doing it to make him feel more secure in his masculinity.
Interesting. So you think it's just pure kind of torture?
Oh, yeah. She's fucking with him, and she's fucking with him good.
Okay. But there's still pleasure that's derived from it, right? And so there's some sort of perverse enjoyment that they're engaging in, and they're seeking of it. So if that's the case, and if that's kind of the stage of life that we are living in, does this genre, this domestic noir genre, in kind of subverting expectations, in kind of the ability of trying to kind of shake us from what we're just used to consuming. Does this film and does this genre kind of get us to think? Because you mentioned something, I don't remember what you said, but you said something like it kind of makes us think, or it surprises us, or something like that. Does that kind of shock us to, I don't know, the real, or does it attach us to something beyond just this proliferation of just banal pleasure seeking and whatnot?
Well, I really hesitate to put it in terms of like the real. I mean, I know you're using it in a Lacanian sense, and I'll be honest, I'm just not secure enough in my knowledge of Lacan to phrase it in that way.
Cool, because you guys are
like
getting way too into the. You guys are playing inside baseball right now. I'd like to bring it back to reality if we can.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm not using it actually so much in the psycholytic sense. I mean it more like in the popular sense. Like if people are like concerned that, okay, so this fucking wanky philosopher is saying that all we have are images and all this other shit, and life isn't real, and what is real? You know, in our Bo Burnham video, we talk about that. Art is a lie. Nothing is real.
Mm-hmm.
Does domestic noir genre, does it help us get to something that's real? Or like meaty or
absolutely.
Like
absolutely. I think that one of the like primary conceits, if I'm using that word correctly, which I'm not sure I am, but I'm one of the primary kind of motivations and interests of the domestic noir genre is that marriage and the family is something that is supposed to be such a safe place that even while we have statistics on domestic violence, and even while we know intellectually that family isn't necessarily the safe place, that the domestic sphere isn't the, you know, warm, nurturing bubble we pretend it is, we have mythologized the family and coupled them in relationships in such a way that it is one of the places that has the most to dig out of. So yeah, I think it absolutely brings us to very real kind of conflicts and disturbing images and ideas and motivations that come out of this domestic sphere that aren't really being challenged or looked at outside of that. So yeah, now that I understand your question, I think I have a better answer.
No, cool. Interesting. Yeah.
Cool. Ryan, what are you thinking right now?
Oh, I was thinking we're moving on.
All right. We are moving on. All right. So one thing I want to bring to our attention is there's something very self-aware, and there's one line that I really like in this movie so Ben Affleck's character owns a bar called The Bar. And the cop even says, "Oh, I love the bar." Very meta. And in general in this movie, there's kind of this relentless self-awareness. Like even in the most romantic part of the movie, which because we're kind of dealing with an unreliable narrator, we don't even know if it actually happened or not. I think we can assume that it did. But this is when they're going through the sugar storm, and he says, "I can't let you go through a sugar storm without getting a kiss." And even like this, there's nothing spontaneous about it. It's like that they look and recognize that we are in a romantic setting, therefore we need to follow the narrative or the motions of romance. And so my question for you guys, philosophers, and for the love of God, please make it concise. Are we, is this the nightmare of living in hyper reality? Like, are we performing in order to adhere to certain kind of compacted references to some other reality?
Well, according to hypermodernity and what Jean Baudrillard says in The Mirror of Production, okay, I'm done.
I think there's what's terrifyingly relevant about the movie is that at the beginning when they're meeting. I think they're meeting for the first time when they're walking through like an art gallery, you know, and
they meet at a party.
Okay, at that party. They're having a very self-aware conversation, you know, a very like she's being the cool girl and he is just he's keeping up with her and they're going back and forth. And yeah, they're supposed to be we're above this art scene, you know, because we really know what's going on and stuff.
Well, they introduce the idea of kind of typecasting people or kind of marginalizing people into these narratives. So Nick, they're looking at other people in the party, and Nick says, "I don't see you sitting around quiet." Or there's this guy here, he's sitting around quietly as he bloviates on his post-grad thesis about Proust. Or the ironic hipster that's so self-aware he makes everything a joke. And then she's like, "Well, what type of guy are you?" And he said, "The corn-fed, corn-fed, salt-of-the-earth Missouri guy.
Right, and then and then flash forward to the very end of the movie, and they've totally become like they have absorbed this idea of the labels to a hyper degree, and that is their life, that is their reality. They live only in the label world, and that whole self-aware thing is still there, but they're not outsiders anymore. They're totally inside the system.
Yeah. See, doesn't this bug you a little bit that the way that they bond is just based on them being mean? Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm just in a stage right now where I just want people to be nice to each other a little bit or something.
Well, that's what the movie's about. It's like the cynical.
That's kind of also like introductory flirting. It's like a strong move, right? Like kind of being a dick. Isn't that what they say you should do?
Yeah.
Negging.
Yeah, exactly. But they're not negging each other. They're negging everybody else. And then standing on top of the bodies that they have just conquested together.
Come on, Austin. Austin, tell me you've never made a friend by bonding over how much you hate the rest of the people around you.
I have, and it's not something that I think is a great habit.
Really? I think that it really just doesn't get any better than that.
See, I really feel like David Fincher's making a much wider point, because he's a super bright, self-aware guy, and he, like, everyone has become those people off in the corner making fun of the rest of society. It feels like, that's like become a very mainstream thing. I don't know. Am I the only person that feels that way?
No, wait, what is the point you're saying?
The point I'm making is that it's kind of a critique of, I feel like, a trend through, I don't know, like how the subculture became the main culture, and how, the subculture used to be, we're the outsiders, we're trying to, we're doing our own thing off of, side of the status quo, and here we are now. Everyone kind of is Amy and Ben Affleck in the movie, at least in popular culture now.
In that they think that they're outside.
It's just so self-aware. It's so everyone is aware of the labels. Everyone's aware of people being aware of the labels, and it goes on and on down the rabbit hole. And so, yeah, that's...
But it's not only that, but the people that he's referring to when he says, this guy looks like a blowhard who talks about his post-grad thesis about Proust. I mean, that guy is dressed in a certain way, probably to evoke, or to basically just like peacock to whoever might want somebody who bloviates about Proust.
Or he's being ironic, which is kind of
even then, it's still, I think, to Austin's point, that you're still commodifying yourself in order to, optimize your value in some sort of a market.
Sure.
Yeah, we talked about this, I don't even remember which episode it was, but where everyone in it is dressed a certain way. Interestingly, because Claire tweeted about that she was listening to it, the Devil Wears Prada episode. And we were like, but Anne Hathaway's character, she's not dressed according to the dictates of fashion. But Meryl Streep clearly says, no, you are dressed a certain way so that you can project a particular image, even in your kind of like
you can't escape
schlumpy clothes or whatever. Right.
You can't escape it. So let's talk about the title. I think that this is, for someone who's read the book a bunch of times, it's probably pretty obvious to you.
Gone Baby Gone Girl.
Gone Baby Gone Girl.
I got so confused because when you said we were doing this, I thought we were doing Gone Baby Gone.
I haven't seen that movie in a long time.
It's low to mid shelf Ben Affleck, I'd say.
It's a better movie.
Ben Affleck directorial.
Yeah.
What is it?
He directed that movie.
Whatever. Okay. Anyway, so the title "Gone Girl" not only refers to the disappearance of Amy's physical self, but that her personality has been negotiated. So this is one of the most interesting things here is that her identity. I mentioned this earlier, but her identity is always being compromised by who she's trying to please and who is trying to control her. So throughout her childhood, she's always struggling to live up to the, quote, amazing version of her that her parents created with all those kids' books. There's a great line where she's like, when I was 10, I quit cello. In the next book, Amazing Amy became a prodigy. And then Nick is like, you played volleyball? She's like, I got cut. She made varsity. So even as an adult, Amy's parents try to kind of transform her into this fictionalized version. There's a part where Amy's mom is like saying, at that same party, she's like, I thought you were going to wear white to match the wedding theme. And even the whole wedding, Amazing Amy is at that party when Nick proposes to her it's a party celebrating that Amazing Amy, the character, is getting married. And I think that's like particularly tragic because yeah, he's like the romance, like we're supposed to think that it's a super romantic scene when he's going there and he's kind of performing, but not only that, like it's only like they're performing for an audience because literally there are these other reporters there who are interviewing her about her life, and there's like this extra relevance to the fact that, oh my God, just as amazing Amy's getting married, so too is Amy. This is such a palatable narrative, but we don't really care about the reality between these two personalities or this couple is. It just doesn't matter. And look, man, like everyone. The reason why I think this movie is so amazing, because everyone has to perform today to fit into some kind of narrative. And especially when you're on YouTube, I mean, it's fucking doubly so for, for people like me. So, I mean, it's understandable why this movie would resonate with me so much.
Do people ever come up to you on the street and go, "Hey, disembodied Jared"?
It's happened a couple times.
Or embodied Jared.
Yeah.
And then they said, "My perception of you was different."
And yeah, I'm like, what do you want to do, man? Yeah. Usually I just try to cut the conversation short so I don't bust the illusion. All right, let's see if there's anything else I wanted to bring up.
Gone Girl, the title.
I was just talking about that. Oh, but if you want to, go ahead.
Oh, I do. So I think that it's important also that it's not Gone Woman, and that's not just for alliterative purposes. I mean, Gone Woman would be a terrible book title, but it's very intentionally Gone Girl.
Yeah.
And that's because most of the way that we see Amy, except for the end, actually including the end, but except for the part where she is at that trailer or somewhere kind of controlling her life, and except for the parts where we're hearing her through her diary, we're seeing Amy through the lens of the Nancy Grace character on TV, through her parents, through these like the vigils, where she's the consummate victim, where it's incredibly infantilizing. And this is one of the places where I do think that the insight into the media is really interesting. The way that it points a spotlight on how we lap up victim narratives, especially about like young, beautiful white women, young, beautiful white girls. And so if she were older, or if she were a woman of color, or if any of these things were different, there wouldn't be this national, like every time you turn on the television, this is what you get, spotlight on the victim of Amy Dunn. And it's her as the victim, that's the Gone Girl. It's not the Amy Dunn that we know for real. That's the Gone Girl, except maybe also in the double sense of what you said earlier about her personality being vacated in lieu of the cool girl or whatever someone else wants to see in her. But my point is that the girl aspect is part of the take on our obsession with these victims of these young, pretty white girls. And I think that that's really important to include in any kind of discussion about the title.
Yeah. The misogyny thing is definitely more present in the book, where Ben Affleck's dad, or it's not Ben Affleck in the book, but Nick Dunn's father, he often, Nick or Amy, I don't remember from which perspective in the particular chapters in the book, will often talk about how the father was a huge misogynist, and he would always say horrible things about the mother being a dumb bitch. And there are parts in the book where Amy kind of refers to herself in a semi-ironic fashion of being the poor dumb bitch. And it's funny how I totally agree that the girl thing is super relevant, and I like the way that you put it, especially when we see, like her face on billboards and stuff like that, and how, And that's another reason why I think that this works so well as a movie, because just seeing the image of beautiful Rosamund Pike on a billboard through screens, we really do get it really does convince us and show us how, just as everyone in the movie is hypnotized by the media going crazy over this beautiful woman that's missing, we can almost see that happening because we have that same kind of gut reaction where when we see a beautiful white girl on a billboard, we're just like, oh my God, that's not real. That's not how reality works. This is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, God, yeah.
There's one particular, almost like really insignificant moment that just reminded me of, but that I think has is really significant is when we see her on the billboard, it's a digital billboard and it's flipping from some other thing, and you can see, or maybe it's not digital, but it's one of the billboards that rolls over, and whatever was on the billboard before, we see it in the process of rolling over to show the new thing of the day.
Right, just some other ad.
Yeah, exactly. And it's that rolling over process, which I think was one of those little touches that makes me love this movie so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's just kind of the visual medium. You can do something super subtle and super clever like that, which is more to Austin's point, is like even a horrible thing like a woman missing is just a commodified narrative that sells well on billboards and sells well on television.
This is literally making me feel sick. Like this is so it's so interesting. This is what I always say, like, I don't always need to love a film, but I can still find it to be so impactful or insightful. This is interesting.
Another thing that points, like another subtle visual thing, is the score. I guess it's not a visual thing, but audio thing is the score really adds to the satirical element at the end, especially when she's telling Ben Affleck, like, look, you were going to do this. You're going to be my loving husband, and it's just this swelling score that, like, it's almost like supposed to be like, wow, right. I agree with her. It's almost like what the movie's saying, when really you're like, wait, this is fucked up what she's trying to get him to do right now.
Right. And I love the scene of, like, when now Amy and Nick are on the same page and they know that they have to manipulate the media, and they see all the media cars outside, and right before they go out of their house, they like turn and wave at the cameras, almost just like Miss America, because they're giving the people what they want. They're giving them the end of the story what they want. But at the end, we have a very cynical ending, and that is that kind of the hyper reality or the narrative supersedes reality, because Amy has trapped him and he is ensnared in the narrative because he can't break up with her, or else he'll be basically crucified by the media.
And this is why I love Carrie Coon's character so much. She's my favorite character in the movie. I mean,
which one is she?
First of all, I think she's
sister?
Brilliant. She's the sister. I mean, I think she's a brilliant actor. If you guys
she's
haven't
the voice
seen
of
The
reason.
Leftovers,
plays Margot,
she's the voice of reason. I mean, she is fucking amazing. So her performance is phenomenal. But also, I like the fact that she is the voice of reason, And I actually would be really curious, Claire, that character in the book, is that character like represented similarly? What do you think of that character?
I honestly can't remember, which makes me think that it probably was pretty similar. But I think that you're right that just how well the actress plays Margot in the film version, her sitting slumped against the cabinets as she says, I can't watch you do this for 18 years. And it slowly dawns on her that part of Nick wants to be with Amy, and just the devastation. Seeing this devastation played out on the face of the person who's the voice of reason is something so much more powerful than you could get in a book, no matter how good the character was. And it's interesting because she's not the straight man exactly. Like it's not that she is a stand-in for the audience that sees things clearly, like the way that a straight man would be in a comedy. She's something else, but and she's not exactly an audience stand-in, but she does have this very particular role of trying to of helping us make that jump between reality and what we're seeing, so that it's understandable, so that we can palate it, but still share with her kind of the horror of what we're seeing.
Yeah. So in the book, So when we did the Thug Notes episode on the book, we have like meticulous notes that I actually reviewed before this recording. But in the book, there's a quote where Nick says that Margot is his confidant, that he doesn't need to perform around, that he can be his real self. So she plays a very interesting role when we consider the idea of unreliable narrators, because he at least tells the audience that whenever I'm with Margot, I'm not performing. And if we're meant to believe that, then she does play a pretty interesting role in that we can believe that there is no performance when he's around Margot. That's reality. That is the reliable narrator, at least if we're to go with what he says. One more thing I wanted to bring up. I hadn't noticed this before. This is another kind of small detail that I had not picked up on previous ones, but the male cop who you can easily forget about. It's not the main cop. I can't remember her name, but it's the guy who kind of follows her and like who really doesn't like Nick. And I was really picking up on that this time. And I think it's because this guy,
Beta male.
Well, no, I was gonna say. I mean, he looks at Nick and he.
Did you just call him a beta?
He looks at the male cop hates him because he's a lazy, good-looking social climber. Whereas the cop is like, I've been living in Missouri my whole life, and I'm not good, and I didn't, move to New York and bag myself a trust fund hottie and come back and get a mansion and just be lazy my whole life. Yeah, there's like this real resentment. But he doesn't even know Nick. It's just that. What is okay? He's a soy boy, bro.
He feels like a pushover because his wife pushes him over. He's got to go do familial responsibility things.
Well, we don't know that.
Ben Affleck is big, strong, gets whatever he wants. Yeah.
I don't think it's so much resentful. That. It's just that it's. Well, there's also but this goes both ways, and that is that Nick is constantly humiliated because he's not fulfilling the narrative of the breadwinner.
Yeah,
but the cop doesn't know that.
No, the cop doesn't know that, but the cop doesn't care because the cop just sees like, I don't like this guy. All I know is the kind of the bullet points of him. He moved to New York, married a rich girl, came back, and now he's rich and he never did anything for it. So fuck him. He must be a killer.
I see a lot of parallels between the way that you're describing that male cop and the way that I don't remember her name, but the kind of friend who ends up like stealing her money, Amy's money at the first place she stays, the way she makes that casual comment about, oh, well, like rich bitch, like married this guy, like whatever. I don't have any sympathy for her. She's making these claims about, or these assumptions about how this woman in this situation is supposed to be and how we should judge her based on that. Whereas the male cop is doing something kind of analogous, I think, in a way, with his very quick assumptions and dislike of Nick. And I don't know if I'm making a good analogy here. What do other people think?
No, I hear you. Yeah, absolutely. Well, she says she says something similar, when she's watching with Amy an image of Amy, she's just like, fuck that, beautiful white girl on a billboard. Just from this image, you can tell that she's probably just gotten everything handed to her whole life. Which,
there's some sort of class resentment again.
Yeah, there's class is narrative in a sense.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to wrap it up there, guys. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Before we leave, reminder, if you guys want to support what we do, I highly recommend checking out wisecrackplus.com. We have our newest pilot on there. Also, Ryan has a new pilot that we're actually going to be submitting to our patrons first. So if you want to check that out, it should be up probably tomorrow. So hit that up at wisecrackplus.com.
Let's Get Stupid. Are we allowed to say the name?
Oh, yeah. If you want to talk about it.
Let's Get Stupid Rich. It's an investment show where, I don't know. Just watch it, I say.
Ryan.
Are you like the Crazy Kramer dude that's on Fox or whatever?
You mean Mad Money?
It's like Mad Money meets Wayne's World.
Yeah, I would say that. All right, guys, where can we find you on the internet, starting with Claire?
You can find me on Twitter at WisecackClaire. Made it easy for you.
And Ryan.
You can find me on YouTube and Facebook at Ryan Shorts and Ryan's Game Show. I love you all very much.
And Austin.
You can hit me up on Twitter, Austin_Hayden. I also do a philosophy podcast called Owls at Dawn, and then another movie podcast that's not wanky and philosophical. So, if you hate my wankiness and philosophicalness, you can just hear me talk about like acting and performance with a director friend of mine in London. It's called I Dig This Movie.
So you're telling me you saved the wanks for here? Thank you, man.
I know my role. It. Right?
I feel honored.
I am an embodied, commodified, disembodied image of wankiness.
Well, you'll be in LA soon, so we'll embody your wankiness. But just
deal.
That sounds like it could be potentially disgusting. Anyway, that's it for today, guys. See you later. Peace.
Goodbye from Hollywood, California.
Laters.